We're just gonna dive into it, I guess. Welcome, first of all, in Rotterdam.
Thank you.
Laura and Michael. I will introduce you via my notations, because the things that you're doing are just, I think, mind-blowing. But I just cannot, like, in one sentence say what you're doing. So I'm gonna start with you, Laura. Laura Raicovich, a New York City-based writer and curator, known for her critical work on cultural institutions and dedication to more equitable cultural production. Her recent book, Culture Strike, Art and Museums in the Age of Protest, was published by Verso Books and is being translated into Italian, Arabic, French, Polish, and Portuguese.
Weirdly enough, yes.
Very interesting. And next to you have Michael Lints. You have 20 years of experience as an operator and an investor. You are a partner of Golden State Venture. That's also the venture that you've founded.
I'm a co-founding partner of the fund.
Co-founder partner. And you lead the firm's first venture capitalist fund in the MENA region.
Yes.
Where you guys are focusing on investing in early stage startups in the Middle East and connecting Southeast Asia to the region.
Yeah.
Previously, you also co-founded an IT management service startup. He was a vice chairman of the Economic Development Board of Rotterdam.
In Rotterdam, yeah.
And was a chairman of the Young Economic Development Board as well.
Yeah.
And your origins are actually here in, not personally in Rotterdam, but next to Rotterdam in Dordrecht.
Yes. Born and raised.
Again, thank you so much for your time. Obviously, you are here for a reason in this beautiful Rotterdam. You are invited by the municipality to work on this assignment, which is the International Board, where you guys are going to advise us, at least try to advise us, in how we should go along within the cultural field as far of financial structures, financial models, but also the maker's climate, and based from your own experiences, right? So this is the third day that you guys are here, and I had a question, like, what is your takes on what you have seen already in these past 3 days? So I'm going to start with you, Laura.
Thank you so much. It's really lovely to be here. I actually have a very soft spot in my heart for Rotterdam because I have a few friends who live here, and so whenever I come, I stay with them. Mm-hmm. So it's really nice to be here and to be asked to be part of this kind of rethinking of how culture is kind of woven through the city. I think through the funding structures in the municipality is a very serious task, and what we've gotten over the last couple of days has been really extraordinary. I mean, a really deep dive into what's going on here, how many different stunning cultural organizations are thriving and doing incredible work, with or without the support of the kind of official cultural structures here, and that's quite amazing. The generosity of the cultural producers that we've met, I think, has been incredible in terms of what they're willing to share, their level of honesty and kind of ability to articulate what their challenges are. And I think, from how I see it, and also coming from the United States, where not only is there no culture ministry on the national level, and public funding is really minimal in comparison to what we have to secure from private sources to make culture work, I think that there is an enormous beauty in the kind of public funding support structures here, and you're quite fortunate as a city to have access to public cultural funds. That said, I've also heard a great deal of frustration and concerns about how those funds have been distributed in the past, how the structures of the municipality and the local government have, managed and governed those funds, and I think more importantly, taking a step back, really looking at questions of how the city is evolving as a place, who lives in it, and who's making what kind of culture, and what the kind of culture therefore is supported by the municipality. And I think that's at the crux of where some of these challenges and discomforts lie. And so for me, as I look at the central problems, I think that they are about issues of equity, access, and governance, ultimately. Okay. And so for me, it's a question really of looking at what the city looks like now as opposed to whenever I think it's really important that the city is in this cultural transition, because it makes sense to re-examine how the whole system was set up in the first place, because it was probably with a different set of players in mind. Exactly. And what I'm seeing is some really amazing young people who are putting together incredible projects that could really use the support of the financial support of the municipality, but aren't necessarily part of the traditional, let's say, more classical cultural structures that typically would be funded on the kind of expanded 4-year plan that the government has set up. So, I
don't want to interrupt you, because we're going to dive into that a little bit more.
Okay, so just to say, I think that that the issues are really around governance and equity, and that's really what I've noticed in these last couple of days.
Thank you so much. We're going to talk about this possible solutions later on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Michael, what are your takes in these past 3 days?
Yeah, and I'll definitely obviously echo what Laura has mentioned. In terms of observations, let me start with kind of hope. I was pleasantly surprised that I'm seeing initiatives that are very grassroots and they just work. And for some reason, they made it work on their own accord. Yeah. With or without government support, but they're, I think what is a beautiful example remains for me is the Afrikaner Week, where we had a presentation yesterday of how they've found ways to generate their own income through consultancy, through different means in different ways. That really excites me. As a former entrepreneur, that's what an entrepreneurial mindset looks like. And it's so important for these areas in Rotterdam. Besides the signs of hope, there were also clear signs of concern. And one of my observations, I've lived in Singapore for close to 14 years, and now in Doha, is I'm missing a sense of long-term guidance. So in our conversations, we kept on asking, what do you think the strategy is for the city for the next 10 years? And people just don't know. And I think for any program that you're building or any system that you're building, you want to make sure that it's part of a longer-term strategy that the city feels and the city can get behind.
To elaborate a little bit more on, you mentioned city, you mentioned Qatar, just briefly. And I have a question, both of you, because you're from New York. So how does what you have seen here compared to the other cities you're familiar with in terms of cultural infrastructure and inclusivity? Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll happy to take a stab. I'll just start by saying that Singapore and Qatar and Rotterdam are entirely
different.
They couldn't be more different. So it's hard to make the comparison, but I'll give a few examples of things that I have seen work. So the one thing what I liked about Singapore, and it was refreshing coming from here, moving to Singapore, was they've made the government almost run like how companies run, and there's pros and cons to it. The pro was that people are incentivized to make the city work, and because they are incentivized, they have equity in actually making, for instance, the arts and culture scene more vibrant. So Singapore came from a very long way. in terms of having more artists in the city, having big art fairs, creating funds for artists to tap into. But what I like a lot is that they were incentivized by working with the private sector. And I've seen this in Qatar as well, where anything that has been done is in collaboration with the private sector, and it allows you to get to a certain scale and reach a certain impact as well.
So what do you think is, what kind of role should the private sector play in this thing? Should they play a role?
100%, and they should step up massively. I had a discussion yesterday, and someone told me from one of our meetings was the private sector doesn't have any incentive to give back or support. I said, oh yeah, they do. I said, the moment the CEO goes home and opens his doors, and he wants to see a city thriving. So apart from working in a city, making money in the city, you also live in the city. Yeah. So it's very important to be able to support an ecosystem around you. So they definitely need to play a big role in this as well.
And I think one of the, to build off of that, and to your important point about Singapore, I mean, Singapore made it a national, I mean, it's a city nation, but they made it a national priority to center culture to draw business and capital into the city. So to make it a more livable city and a more interesting city to live in, to attract people to come live there, to make it their base of business, they used culture as the lever. Now, that is not necessarily going to work everywhere. I mean, it's a very particular, set of urban circumstances. But I think that is very interesting and something for us to take note of, because what I think happens in a lot of cities is that culture is like the add-on. Exactly. It's like the thing that's off to the side. It doesn't have very much clout. It's like, oh, the extra. Oh, that's for the elite. And that comes from the histories of the way that culture has been funded and executed. And I mean, and especially in the West and in the North, we have this idea that somehow culture only happens in museums or philharmonics and, theaters and concert halls. And culture is happening right here as we sit over this table. Exactly. Culture happens every night when you go home and you cook a meal for your family, or or watch a program streaming. That's cultural consumption. And so, we have to recognize that art and life are not separated, and that cultural experiences don't just happen in sanctioned cultural space. Yes. And I think this is a reclamation of something that used to be very alive in human life, and still is in many cultures on the planet, but just not necessarily in the context of New York or Rotterdam,
Exactly. Yeah. And I just want to riff on this one. There's one funny example from Qatar, and I learned it as I moved there. So what big Qatari corporations do is they work with local influencers. And you can be an influencer sitting in your home, I think we talked about yesterday, with only 6,000 followers. But they want you to thrive. So they use your assets in a way to promote their own business. So you would have major hotels, government organizations, all working with local influencers. And this opened up, I'm like, that this is possible. Yeah.
And it makes sense.
And
it's smart.
It makes so much sense,
but,
right?
But I think that that has to do with, because Singapore itself has just a national idea of how they should, let's say, integrate culture in their system.
Well, and they also have issues around freedom of speech.
But
so what culture and for whom? And I think that this question of what culture and for whom is something that's at the very core of what the discussion is here.
Yeah.
And so, I think, coming from the U.S. context, where we have kind of the inverse problem, where we have too much private money in culture, which creates a different set of conflicts
and dynamics
that can be very toxic, can be great, can be also very toxic. But we both have the same problem in that we need to kind of rebalance how we are funding culture so that not one sector has such an outsized influence. And I think that this is really important. Anyone who runs a business anywhere in the world knows that having too many resources coming from one source of funds is
Yeah.
going to be problematic.
Yeah.
And, you said this yesterday when
Yeah.
you said we won't invest in something where we own more than 20%.
Yeah.
I think that this is something that's like, it's a universal logic. And I think in order to maintain independence, culture, in order to be meaningful and to build meaning, which is what culture does, is that culture needs to have a certain level of independence, right?
So, question for you, Laura, because you have written a lot about moments of protest and how museums and institutions can play a role in that part. So, did you observe any dynamics also here in Rotterdam where you saw that these institutions are struggling also with how they should take a role in this conversation?
I think. Well, I mean.
Are they grappling with it?
I think I think that's a very key question because, and I think yes, they are grappling with it because I think that they're. And this is something I felt very powerfully because in this moment right now in the United States, there's a lot of self-censorship happening because of what's happening at the federal level with the president and the kind of the new restrictions on speech and on expression that he's fostering, if explicitly and implicitly, right? And I think that when you're going through a transition, there's always fear around losing funding. Yeah. There's always fear about getting less funding. There's always fear about getting marginalized. Culture is always going to be precarious until unless it is permeating every aspect of society in a conscious way by society. So, I have heard that, maybe not so explicitly, but I have definitely heard that folks here are willing to fight, but also a little bit tentative. If they have one foot inside the system, it's a little bit hard to say, okay, we're really going to go hard here because they don't want to be shut out at the same time. And so they don't know the way the chips are going to fall. Yeah. And I think that's a real struggle. And so one of the things that we've been asking folks as we've met them is like, are there things that you want to see put on the table that maybe you feel like you can't or maybe shouldn't put on the table yourselves? Because that's a way that we can be useful as external people, as people coming from the outside. There are certain things that we can say with ease that will be heard differently and without repercussions than can be said by folks who are like trying to work within the system.
So I want to elaborate on that a little bit more. Like, in your view, like how can cultural institutions contribute to more actively to the social justice and equity? Then how can they do that?
I think that different kinds of institutions have different kinds of DNA, and so they need to do what they're good at, right? And so I'm not advocating for, like, for example, in New York, like Lincoln Center isn't going to suddenly, put out, a Black Lives Matter campaign. Like, that would just be bizarre, and everybody would be like, what are you doing, However, there are ways that support can be shown. And I'll give a couple of examples that I think are kind of cool, even though I'm not sure they had like a really profound impact, but they had an impact on the audiences of those institutions. So, and I'm going to go back in time a little bit just because I think it's easier to see things historically sometimes. So when Donald Trump was first elected in 2016, one of the first big policies he put out was this Muslim ban. And a lot of stuff was happening, at the airports. The taxis were shutting down, the airport shut down. Like there were huge protests against the Muslim ban, and some of the big institutions in New York, arts institutions, actually did cool stuff. Like the Museum of Modern Art, not known for its like hugely progressive, in the streets vibes, put on a show of all of the Muslim artists that would have been banned from their collection. So they put together an exhibition like really fast, which is also not a thing that most classical big institutions can do. But they put on this show of artists in their collection that would be banned. The Guggenheim Museum, also a mega institution, also not typically very activist. They were part of an amicus brief that actually tried to fight the Muslim ban because they thought that it was so wrong. So they actually submitted an amicus brief as a cultural institution. So there are different ways that people can work. At the Queen's Museum, we're much smaller. That's where I was the director when he was first elected. We joined the art strike that was planned for that day, and we had a day where the museum was closed to regular operations. The staff planned this, like we all voted on whether we were going to be open or closed. The staff decided we all were going to close the museum and have a day of convening because the museum is in one of the most diverse places on the planet with a huge immigrant population, and so we wanted to be a place where people could come and feel welcome, to feel like they could express themselves, they could make posters and buttons for the coming protests that weekend, et cetera, but that they could not feel alone, because I think a lot of people were feeling like they were literally in danger in our museum context. Now that wasn't going to be the same because 20% of my staff were DACA recipients, so they were like literally feeling like, oh my God, I might get deported to a country I've never been to because of what Trump said during the campaign. So like the material conditions of the people who I was working with every day were shifting in that moment. Now that wasn't probably the same at MoMA or the Guggenheim, but they also did things that they could do from their positionality. So I'm not saying everybody needs to kind of like get on the front lines and whatever, but there are things that need to happen, and also things that need to happen collectively.
So
as a sector, as like the cultural sector, a museum sector, or whatever.
And my question to you was more like from an institution point of view, but as you mentioned already, everybody has this role like within this cultural sector.
Yeah, I mean, let me give you another few specific examples of like what we did at the Queen's Museum that I thought was important, because people were so affected personally. I said to everyone, look, I know this is a really difficult time, and I want you to be able to feel like you can take time during every day to do what you need to do. Whether you need to spend, an hour calling members of Congress, or you need to, go home and check on your kids, or you need to, like, I want you to be able to take that time. Like, you have official permission to do the thing that you need to do, and, because I really wanted people to feel like they could take care of themselves, and that they could engage in civic life, even though they had to come to work every day, right? And I wanted them to feel like this was a place where we could have those conversations. Now, not everybody, I mean, it wasn't like we had Trump supporters on our staff, but we certainly had a diversity of political views in the museum. It wasn't like everybody was super on the same page or even had the same political vocabulary. So part of it was also kind of like doing some like self-education work to kind of make sure that when one, maybe more activist kind of group of people talked, it wasn't alienating to another group of people who were not so connected to that language. So that was also very important.
Interesting. You talk about taking care of themselves. You talk about the people who are actually also given a handout by the institution. In this case, your museum, right? Talking about taking care of yourself. Everybody has his role within this cultural sector. I want to towards my question towards you, Michael. Since you have a background in economic development, what is your view on entrepreneurship and the intersection between entrepreneurship and culture, and how can we stimulate it more so that people can be self-dependent? And
just maybe also to your previous question is I've heard over the past few days where it feels like it's the big institutions against the small institutions. It is the big galleries or the big museums almost against grassroots and vice versa. What I was surprised about, if you look at our industry, if I need a mentor, and I've been investing for the past 20 years, and like if I need a mentor in my industry, someone in my industry steps up and helps me and guides me. And I think there is a massive role to be played for the large institutions to speak to the grassroots and like, okay, let's sit down, let's look at your plans, and I'll take my experience of what I've done over the past decades and help you craft your plan that makes it more sustainable, better. Because I think the educational part on these smaller projects can be really helped and supported by the bigger institutions. Not telling them what to do, but it's more, I'm going to sit next to you and help you and guide you through this entire process. I think there's an intangible value that you can unlock just by sitting next to each other. And that's similarly for entrepreneurship. Like I've always had throughout my life in our businesses, mentorship, and for us now, so we do support arts and culture quite a bit. So to give an example, we supported a number of exhibitions in Singapore, all because we've met these entrepreneurs in our, we were hearing a pitch of a company and this founder would tell me, oh Mike, we've met this amazing artist and she really wants to scale her business but she doesn't know how. And then we'll sit next to her, hear her story. And then I was like, what's your biggest dream? And she's like, I want to have this massive exhibition about traditional art and NFTs in the heart of Singapore. I said, okay, let's make it happen.
Yeah.
And just
I'm sure her eyes must have gone.
Yeah, and just the let's make it happen was like what? I said, yeah, we'll call one of our friends that owns a gallery. We'll call two of the brands and we'll help you. There is no benefit for us directly, but indirectly, and this is important, but indirectly, another successful social entrepreneur means a potential company for us to invest in down the line. So we look at this at a very, very long-term view. So I think there is this massive...
But I think you are really rare. I mean, I think you're very special and rare, Michael. I mean, I have to say, like, I love what you say, and I am so taken by it because I have so infrequently heard this kind of approach, because I feel like part of the reason that there's a lot of fear around for-profit endeavors is that they don't, that in the cultural sector and in the nonprofit sector we don't hear enough. We're in it for the long-term view, right? People, so the quid pro quos tend to be very like upfront and transactional. And so I think that I think the more that we hear somebody like you talking in this way about what culture means and what the relationship between growth and the way that you can build capital and cultural production and meaning making, I think that is where things start to get very exciting. But I wanted to also say something about the mentorship piece, because I think part of the problem with the idea that these more established organizations are going to, kind of mentor the smaller organizations is that there is a profound feeling that they have totally different aims. And so, and that there are like racialized and economic issues that are embedded in the way that, the way that Decoded works is like literally functions is completely anathema to someplace like the Afro-Kanderwijk Cooperative. Now, that's not to say that if there was that's not to say that if like a more up and coming organization or a smaller scaled organization needed help from a grant writer that had been successful, or somebody who could help them structure the budgets or tell their story in the way that the people who have the resources need to hear it. Now that's a different kind of conversation, and I actually think that the municipality might have a role to play in that,
and this is directly my last question to both of y'all. Based on what you have seen these past 3 days and your background, like what immediate advice would you offer Rotterdam to strengthen their cultural sector?
I think and I'm going to speak for then my own industry. I think what the municipality can do, because they have a massive network in the city itself, is to pinpoint who in the private sector is willing and crazy enough to look at this very long-term vision and be a supporter and an ally. Because I think if you have a few examples, there's going to be a ripple effect across the private industry. And we've like in our own industry, we've seen. I have examples like Robert Smith is an amazing investor in the US. You might know him. Like for a lot of investors, he is an example because he gives back a massive amount back to the community. Not because of any short-term gains or any like there's some ROI to be gained. No, there's because we have a long-term view. If my direct environment is doing well, I'm doing well. That's how simple it is. So I think for the municipality to find these heroes in their community, in the private sector, and make them their allies, I think you can bigger the base of the private sector is going to be supportive of this, the culture sector as well.
And likewise, I think that there's a lot of interesting matchmaking that can be done within the municipality, and whether that's around this kind of resources or in this theme of linking art and life and re-embedding culture in all aspects of how we think about the operations of a city. This through threading culture through all of the departments within the city, not giving up its own department, but giving culture a seat at the table at all of the different departments will improve those departments.
Yes.
And if you do it right, will actually make culture important to them.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying, for some departments that might look like they really will want and will fall in love with having an artist in residence to help them think through their policy in a totally different way. Because what do artists bring to the table? Well, creators and artists bring other ways of looking at the world around us to the table. So if they have intractable problems, what's better than sitting next to an artist or a maker who's going to be like, oh, have you thought about it like this?
Yeah.
It's not necessarily that they're going to make a drawing or a poster for your next event. No, it's about like the meat of it,
So that is great advice for the municipality, right? But how about the makers, the grassroots, the people who are actually creating the culture? What for advice would you give them?
I think you got to fight for your seat at the table. And
like how, Sway?
Yes.
How? Like how?
Oh, okay. Yeah. So a couple of things. I do think that pressure works, and one of the great examples that we've heard about over these last few days is the kind of reintegration of the night mayor. And their role in the city, and the night bus coming back, and all of these things, and that was actually through a coalition of pressure that was built by nonprofit, for-profit, and all different folks who had an interest in nightlife, right? And so I think there is a lot of work that can be done, especially as even through like a neighborhood lens. Like you could go, like, hey, let's all get together in this neighborhood, and all of us smaller organizations, like really let's go together to the municipality. Let's advocate also for group fundraising efforts. Exactly. Sometimes I think it's really hard to tell a story. One of the things that I was really working on at the Queens Museum was working with other like-minded cultural organizations, to submit applications to really big foundations who wouldn't have talked to us or some of my partners individually, but as a group we could say, look at the impact that we're having as a cohort.
Exactly.
And would you consider funding us like this? So like coalition building and presenting yourselves as a multifaceted element of a much bigger ecosystem, but as something substantial, And because I think it's hard, because I think like especially for these 4-year grant cycles, you have to have a budget of a certain size, et cetera, and many of these smaller places may not, and they may not have the infrastructure, but maybe together they could.
So basically, organize yourself, advocate for it, and lobby in the right way.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And I know that's adding another layer of labor to everything.
But fair enough. It is what works if you want to.
But let's not forget that this is the people's money. This is tax money. It's our money, right? So like, where do we want it to go?
Yeah.
As a maker, hate it or love it, you're an entrepreneur. and entrepreneurship is like chewing glass. So it is going to be painful. And to Laura's point, you'll have to do more. It's unfortunate, but it's true. The one thing I would say is, from my conversation, I've been really trying to. I'm not saying that the private sector is the solution. I'm saying they are a part of a bigger solution.
Yeah.
Correct.
And I'm really hoping, it's like someone told me yesterday, and she was still fairly, well, she's 28, but in my book, fairly young. And she's like, but Mike, talking to the corporations feels like selling out. So I said, okay, let's flip it around. The moment you are in a position of being able to help your own community, you're in a position of power.
Exactly.
And you can only get there by building the right allies.
Yeah.
So my hope and my wish is that for the makers, view yourselves as entrepreneurs. And as part of your entrepreneurship, it is building these allies. And whether it is working together as a group of makers and being a bigger entity and speaking to your, whether it's donors or sponsors or grants, but also speak to the private sector. I keep on saying this. The private sector might not know how to approach you. Maybe it's your time to approach the private sector.
And maybe the municipality can ease the way.
Yes, 100%.
You know, that
they should. That's
their
their job.
It's their job to be that intermediary,
100%.
to be that facilitation. That's important.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Laura Raicovich and Michael Lints.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you.